안녕하세요. Hello, welcome. Now, when I said, I am Bruce Hood, what I really should have said is, this is Bruce Hood. Because everything that I am is a product of my brain. In fact, this is my brain. This is a picture taken of my brain in one of our studies. It's not my heart. It's not my kidneys. I could have these organs transplanted, but I would still be the same person. It's our brain that makes us who we are. Every one of you has a brain, I hope. Every brain is special. Every brain is unique. But how does it work? And what does it do? Well, let's investigate that question. Why do you need a brain? Here we go. Consider this creature. This is a sea squirt. Now, the sea squirt starts off life with a very simple brain. It uses its brain to navigate around the ocean floor looking for a good rock to attach to. And when it finds that rock, it loses its brain. Only living creatures that need to navigate around their world need brains. Other living things, like trees and plants, they don't have brains. So brains are for moving around your world, understanding the world, and remembering where you've been. When the sea squirt attaches to a rock, it no longer needs to navigate around the world, so it loses its brain. Only intelligent animals have brains. And the human brain is about 7 times larger than you would imagine for an animal of our size. I actually have one here to show you. Would you like to hold my brain? Catch. Is it light? No, it's quite heavy, isn't it? It's not real. It's just rubber. But it's the same size and the same weight as a real human brain. Can I have my brain back? Oh! Oh! Thank you. Oops. Okay, so the human brain is made in 2 halves. And each half is called a hemisphere. Now, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left. Now, you wouldn't normally be aware of this, and we don't know why the brain crosses over. But if you damage one side, you would discover that the other part of the body was affected. Now, notice, look at all these creases and folds. Why does the brain look like a large walnut? Well, to answer that, we need to zoom in to the building blocks of the brain to get an understanding. This is an image of a special kind of brain cell called a neuron. It looks a little bit like a strange alien creature from outer space with lots of tentacles. The thin ones are called the dendrites, and the thicker ones are called the axons. And each neuron communicates through these connections by electrical charges. There are about 86 billion neurons in the human brain. And each neuron has up to 10,000 connections. And if you were to add all the connections end to end, it would be about 180,000 kilometers. That's more than enough to stretch 4 times around the equator. More than enough to encode any pattern of electrical activation. In fact, there are more possible connections and patterns than in the human brain than there are atoms in the observable universe. And that's why we say the human brain is one of the most complex structures to be found in nature. Now, here's an interesting fact. The human baby is born with almost its full complement of neurons. You don't grow any more neurons, really, as you age. It's just that the connections haven't been formed. Here is a picture of a baby's brain at 1 month and a brain at 6 years. And below, you can see the microscopic images of the neurons. As you can see on the left here, the young baby's brain has very few connections. But by 6 years on the right side, there are many more connections. The brain is wiring up. This wiring up is triggered by the brain sending out signals to form connections. But whether the connections actually stay or not depends on experience. Because the experience strengthens the patterns. Without the experience, the connections would just simply wither away. In other words, you have to use them or lose them. This early experience explains many aspects of child development. For example, as babies, we become face experts. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to tell foreigners apart? Yeah? This is a famous comedian in England, and I'm always been mistaken for him. Yeah? If you haven't seen lots of faces, then it's very difficult to tell them apart. This is why we find it difficult to tell monkey faces apart. But here's an interesting fact. Very young babies can tell all faces apart. Doesn't matter whether they are Asian or Caucasian or even monkeys. But by 1 year of age, they become tuned into the faces that they're used to seeing. The experience is strengthening those connections, forming the patterns across the neural networks in the brain. They're becoming tuned in to the environment. Now, this experience explains a very interesting, peculiar illusion. This is called the hollow face illusion. Now, as you watch it, you should notice that the face appears to move in one direction, and then when you reach the hollow side, it reverses and goes in the opposite direction. Just watch this for a moment. Now, the reason you see that is because you have no pattern for hollow faces in your brain. Your brain sees the inside of the mask and assumes that it's just a normal face sticking out the way. And that's why it appears to reverse in direction. So these patterns of experience are encoded in our brains. In many ways, they're like memories. But memories aren't stored static patterns. Rather, they're always changing, and they're quite flexible. Now, here's another example about your mind and why you can't always trust everything you perceive. This is an illusion called the Knizia illusion, named after the Italian psychologist who first reported it. What you should see is a white square sitting above 4 circles, black circles. Put your hands up if you can see that. Of course, there is no square there. If you take the circles away, it disappears. Now, the reason that you see this is because your brain looks at this pattern and assumes that the only way you could have 4 circles, each with this piece missing, must be that there is a white square actually there. But here's the really interesting thing. If I was to go into the back of your brain, and stick an electrode into the visual area, I could find neurons which fire to real squares, but they also fire to illusory squares. In other words, the brain is generating its own electrical activity to make sense of the pattern. Here's another example. Now, as you look at this pattern, some of you might see it actually appearing to move. It might make you feel a bit sick. But it's completely stationary. Again, if I was to go into your brain, I can find cells which normally respond to movement, real movement, and these are also activated when you look at this kind of pattern. So the important point is that illusions are generating real brain activity. Okay. You want to see another one? Yes? You want to see another one? Good. All right. Here's an example where an experience can have a lasting effect on your brain. So I want you to stare at the center, okay, for 30 seconds. This is called the motion after effect. And the reason that you experience this is because if you overstimulate the motion neurons in one direction, the neurons which respond to the opposite direction become activated, so that a stationary pattern appears to be moving. Okay, so our mind and our experiences are generated by the brain. And we often think that we have rich experience of the world around us. But let me just show you how limited that experience really is. Because I'm going to demonstrate how I can control your mind with my mind. In this next example, I'm going to show you some playing cards. I want you to choose one card. Don't tell your neighbor. And I'm going to use my mind to control the card that you choose. because I'm then going to select that card and take it away. So first of all, choose a card. Focus on it. Don't tell your neighbor. Yes, I'm getting it now. Okay, you've selected your card. I want you to remember it because I'm going to remove it. And it's gone. How did I do that? Was it magic? Am I supernatural? No, of course not. There's no such thing as supernatural power or psychic ability. Okay? I used a trick. And by the way, if you haven't figured out the trick was I changed every card. But because you were only focusing on one card, your own card, you didn't notice all the other cards had changed as well. The brain is remarkable. The brain provides the mind. And I think the remarkable thing about illusions is that they reveal that even when you know that things are not what they seem, you still cannot see it any other way. And that's because we are a product of our brains. But probably one of the greatest illusions is something I'm going to tell you about now, which is the topic of a book I wrote called The Self-Illusion. You see, most of us have an experience that we exist as an individual inside our body. We have consciousness, and our conscious experience makes us think that we are coherent, integrated, and almost controlling our body. But I would like to suggest that just in the same way as the brain creates these stories and illusions that we saw earlier, this experience of ourself is also a construct of the brain. In fact, I would go as far to say that our brain is a social brain that has evolved over millions of years to enable us to interact with each other. If we look at the structures of the brain, we can find areas which seem to be specialized for processing social information. We have areas which process our bodies and faces of others and ourselves. There are areas which are active when we're thinking about what someone else is thinking. Deep inside the brain, there are centers which respond to our emotions during social interactions. And recently, we've discovered areas which allow us to copy or imitate everyone around us. If you think about it, we are a very social animal. We spend our time in large groups, and at weekends, we often go to stadiums to watch events in large numbers. And this is an interesting slide. This is a picture of football fans watching Liverpool play. And this is Michael Owen, who has just missed the goal. And notice how he's clasping his head. And everyone is copying him. All except this one, who is on the other side. So this, I think this is very interesting, the way that we behave in groups. How do we become these social animals? And what is the role of this self-illusion? Well, I think childhood is really important. We spend the longest period of our lives as children more than any other animal on the planet. Why is that? It's not simply to educate. Rather, we have to learn to become members of the group. And that requires learning to become a self. We all need others. Even as adults, we need the emotional support of others. And we know from the studies of animals that if you raise them in isolation, they end up very deprived. Even though you give them the food and the warmth in the water, they need other animals and groups to thrive. Babies start off from the very beginning being sociable. They will cry when they see someone else in distress. They will smile at you if you smile back at them. And even older toddlers will help strangers. I want to show you now a video of social behavior in two babies. And I want you to watch carefully because you'll hear the father in the background sneeze or cough. And watch what the babies do.
It's my voice. Oh, bless you. How's the baby? Oh, bless you.
So babies are sociable, and they become more sociable as they grow up. But they also develop a sense of their own identity, their own self. They will recognize themselves in a mirror, something that only sociable animals can do, such as elephants and dolphins. Other animals who are not social don't recognize their reflection. This path to development is one which requires coordinating the self with the group. Now, another important component of the self is self-control. If you want to be liked, you have to be able to control your own impulses, control your own emotions, and listen to other people. Very young children find it very difficult to control their impulses. And we know this from a very famous test called the marshmallow test. In this test, the child has a marshmallow, a delicious marshmallow in front of them, a candy. And they're told that if they wait until the experimenter comes back, they can have two. And so the measure of interest is how long can they wait before they gobble up the marshmallow. This turns out to be a very difficult task for toddlers, as you're about to see. Now, it turns out, if you measure the amount of time that the child can wait, this predicts many things which are important. It predicts how well liked they are by their friends and how popular they are. It predicts how well they do at school. Their performance 10, 15 years later, you can predict on their score when they're only 4 years old. And also, you can predict how well adjusted they are, how happy they are. So being able to control your own emotions is really important to every aspect of development. If you can't control your emotions, you can't concentrate, you're selfish, and you can't help others around you. Now, I hope you're beginning to understand that the brain has many systems. There are systems which control our basic bodily functions. There are systems which control how active we are. There are systems which control our drives of hunger and aggression, as well as our emotions. And then there are all these other systems which regulate and coordinate all these different forces to produce a single coordinated individual. These systems all mature at different rates. And that's one of the reasons that children behave differently at different ages. And yet, we still feel as if we are the individual inside our head. We're not aware of all the unconscious processes which are really controlling our behaviors. We feel like a puppet master driving a machine. In fact, if you ask people to meditate and close their eyes and try and locate where they think they are, they often point to their head somewhere in the middle behind the eyes. But there can't be a little you inside your own head, because that wouldn't make any sense. Because if there was a little you inside your head, then who is inside their head, and their head, and their head? So you can never get to the sense of self. Rather, our brain is really made up of lots of independent processes, which are all relatively independent. And it's the output of all those processes that the brain combines to form a story. And that story is yourself. So, all the processes, all the experiences that we have become the information and input that constructs the sense of identity. All our experiences with our friends and our family and our jobs and all the other things in life construct this sense of who we are. And if you take them away, your sense of identity can vanish. Thank you.
Which is more correct to say, that we've erased a memory or that we've lost our way in conjuring up that memory? And does every memory that has been embedded into our minds sort of leave a trail or fragment behind, making it possible for us to conjure it up after we've forgotten it?
Those are excellent questions. You can forget or fail to remember for three reasons. Either you don't encode properly, either you do not store the memory properly, or finally, you cannot retrieve the memory. My prediction is that retrieval is one of the major problems. Because we've all had that experience of being unable to remember anything, but then when we're shown the correct answer, we recognize it. So I think a lot of memory failure is because we cannot retrieve the memories. But also, if you're not paying attention and focusing, then you don't encode a strong trace as well. So it can be all three. But my suspicion, I think what you're interested in, is the failure of retrieval. That's a great question. Thank you.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 창동고등학교 2학년 12반 이하로입니다. 방금 자아에 대해서 설명을 해주셨는데 전부터 궁금해 오던 게 그 어떤 한 사람이 예를 들어 자기 자신은 소심한 사람이라고 생각하지만 일부러 대범한 척 프리텐더 한다고 생각을 했을 때 그러면은 그 사람이 생각하는 소심한 그 자아가 아니라 그 사람이 꾸며내고 있는 그 거짓 자신 자체가 그 사람의 자아가 될 수 있는 것인가요?
Thank you. Another good question. What is the true nature of self? And I think that we have all had these experiences where we behave differently in different situations. Or we do something which seems so out of character with what we think we are. And I think this reflects the importance of the context that we're in. For example, many people find speaking in public very frightening and stressful. I do. So I might be timid in front of a crowd, but in a different situation with other people, I will feel very differently. So the true nature of what I am is dependent to some extent on the context in which I find myself. So if we, for example, become angry, I say I wasn't myself, but that just simply reflects the fact that the context has produced something which is unusual. Okay?
Hello.
Hello.
저는 창동고등학교 2학년 14반 정주은이라고 합니다. 네, 제가 여쭤볼 질문 중에 첫 번째는요. 저희가 평상시에 잠을 자게 되면 꿈을 꾸지 않습니까? 그런데 그 꿈이 저희의 뇌랑 어떤 연관이 있는지, 저희 여태까지 경험에 따라 달라지는 건지, 아니면 그냥 저희의 생각에 의해서 그렇게 꾸게 되는 건지, 그리고 또 영화 인셉션에서 보면 혹시 그렇게 사람의 꿈을 조종해서 그런 것이 가능한지, 그게 첫 번째 질문이고요. 두 번째 질문은 심리학에서 보면 무의식이라는 파트가 있습니다. 그 무의식의 파트를 보면 예를 들면 그 사람이 거짓말을 할 때 무의식적으로 손이 입 쪽으로 닿게 되거든요. 자기 입을 가리기 위한 그런 행동이라고 볼 수 있는데 무의식하고 혹시 뇌랑 어떤 관련이 있는지 그거에 대해서 궁금합니다.
Okay, I'll answer question 2 first. Inception is a work of fiction. So it's not possible. Question 1 on sleep. Can it tell the future? Well, no. But maybe what you were asking me is, what is the purpose of dreams? We don't really know. There are many ideas. And one idea is that this is a way for the brain to make sense of a lot of information that is unresolved, problems which have been in the background of your mind during the day. Also strange associations with thought processes. But there is also some examples where people have dreamed of a solution to a problem. For example, the discoverer of benzene, the compound, dreamt of a snake eating its own tail. And indeed, that is the shape of the structure of the molecule for benzene. So there are examples where dreams do give you insight to problems that you've been thinking about. Which leads me to your last question, which is about the idea of the unconscious. Most of our thought processes are unconscious. It's like an iceberg. Consciousness is the tip of the iceberg, and everything below are all the unconscious processes that feed the information up to consciousness. we're not aware of the majority of the activity of what our brain is doing.
강연 내용 중에 커가면서 뇌가 커넥션을 와이어링업해서 패턴을 만든다고 하는데 이 한 번 지정된 패턴이 우리가 이민을 가거나 그래서 생활 환경이 많이 달라지고 그러면 저장된 패턴이 다른 패턴으로 변화가 될 수 있나요?
The patterns are always changing. In the same way that memories are not cast in stone, the example I gave with the false memory, our experiences are always changing to include new information all the time. So our memory is really not that reliable. And when we move to a new environment, it's actually often very difficult to recover memories because the environment is very important for storing clues and context, which allows you to recover memory. So for example, we know that if you are a diver, a swimmer, and you have to remember words, they give you a list of words to remember. If you dive down to the bottom of the seafloor and we give you the list of words, you have to remember them. And then we take you up onto the surface. It's very difficult to remember the words. But when you dive back down again, you can remember the words. So context is very important for helping you recover and retrieve your memories. So the best way to study for an exam is to study in the exam hall. You should try and recreate the same environment if you want to pass exams, the same situations, and also the same emotions. And that's why people, when they sit in an exam, if they get overwhelmed with stress, they don't have the same emotional state when they were trying to encode or remember the information. So the closer you can make the encoding stage to your retrieval stage, the better and more memories you can find.
다음 질문할게요. Hello, my name is Im Hae-jin, and I'm teaching in elementary school.
Hello.
Hi. And as I'm teaching in school, I'm wondering how the brain influence on learning. And according to your lecture, it seems like the brain, the learning is completely depends on the brain. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I feel like some people are born with a smart brain and some people don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if you think that someone has a smarter brain and someone don't, or...
Yes. Okay, well, there are individual differences in performance, and as a teacher you will know that some children are much more capable than others. Of course, that level of ability often reflects the nature of the task. Some people are good at mathematics. Some people are good at languages. Some people are more general. We are individuals, and there is a very reliable relationship between intelligence of the child and the intelligence of the parents. But that biology is still always working within the educational environment. So I think the best strategy is to try and find what is the strength of the child and work to those strengths, because we're not all the same. Most importantly, I increasingly think that the social, emotional happiness is fundamental to the motivation of the students. And so that's something that we need to think about very seriously. I also think that those processes are important for creativity. Because when you're happy and you're interacting with other children and you don't feel that pressure, then the imagination becomes more fertile. So I'd like to see a more rounded development in education as a whole. But I understand there are many problems to change systems. Thank you.
Thank you.